Okay, so we have some examples here that we want to evaluate the square roots. Okay, so I'm going to show you a couple things that might help. Now, you might have a calculator that has a square root button, like my calculator that costs 70 cents has a square root button. The problem is a lot of times it's going to give you a decimal approximation when you don't want one. So sometimes it'll be helpful and sometimes maybe it won't. Okay, so let's look at the square root of 64. So is there a number times itself that equals 64? And the answer is, yeah, there is, and it's 8. Notice that when I write the 8, I don't put the radical symbol anymore. You've taken the square root of 64, and the answer is 8. Sometimes I have students and they're like, I'm going to keep writing that radical symbol. Once you take the square root of it, we no longer have that symbol. We just put the 8. Now, let's say you didn't know the square root of 64 was 8. Here's something you can do. You can take 64 and you can break it down into its prime factorization. So let's say you said 4 times 16, and that was 2 times 2, and 16 was 4 times 4. So these are called factor trees, and you may have seen those before. Anyway, this is called a prime factorization, that 64 is a bunch of 2's, right? How many are there? 6. Well, the rule is if you're taking a square root for every pair, you get 1 out. So there's a pair, there's a pair, there's a pair. That means 2 times 2 times 2 outside the radical, and that just would equal 8. So I'll use that trick later on too, but that's what you could do if you weren't sure what the square root of 64 was. All right, so let's go to the next one, B. Notice that the subtraction sign or the negative sign is in front of the radical. That's important because we cannot take the square root of a negative number. It's not real. We'll talk about those, but they're not real numbers. Okay, and right now we're just working with real numbers. So when we say the square root of a, we're saying for our purposes a is greater than or equal to 0 right now. Now we will deal with negative ones later. Okay. What's the square root of 49 then? 7. 7 times 7 is 49. So what do I do with that negative sign? It just comes down. So the answer is negative 7. Okay, now here we have a fraction. In a little bit we're going to learn a rule that helps us deal with that. But for now, let's just think, what times what would equal 1/4? Well, it turns out it's 1/2. 1/2 times 1/2 equals 1/4. We multiply fractions straight across. Okay, so the square root of 1/4 would just be one of them, so 1/2. Okay, fractions, well, we'll get a rule that'll help us with that. Now, here's another example. That square root symbol in this case is sort of like parentheses. It says we want to do this adding first, and then we're going to do the square root. And then you can see the next example if you're looking ahead. Oh, they don't have it written that way. It's written a little bit different. We're going to get 2 different answers. So here we're going to say, what's 9 plus 16? 25. And then we're going to say, what times what equals 25? You know, like what number times itself would be 25? 5. Okay, now let's look next door and see what happens here on E. Well, this says take the square root of 9. Okay, so a number times itself that equals 9, that's 3. Plus, now take the square root of 16. Which we already talked about that, that's 4. So in this case, I have 3 plus 4, which is 7. Okay, so remember, those are 2 different answers there. Okay, it makes a difference how they write it. All right, we'll do more examples. These are way fun.